It's Tuesday, the 28th of September 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael Thompson.
Now, New South Wales and Victorian residents get a peek at when they can start resuming a lockdown-free existence. That's our main story. Also coming up, Sigma Healthcare lobs a bid for its arch rival, Crypto-currencies wobble, and Qantas gives the cold shoulder to Western Australia. Then stay listening for Sean's chat to Peter Fitzsimons, the chair of the Australian Republic Movement. But first, Sean, New South Wales residents got a timeline yesterday for the easing of restrictions from Premier Gladys Berejiklian. The Premier said, and this is a bit of an understatement, that it had been a slog. And she called on vaccine-hesitant people to get a jab.
Vaccine-hesitant? Ms Berejiklian is a very popular Premier in New South Wales, but she's saying a slog. It's been atrocious. And she's talking about vaccine-hesitant people. What are they? Anti-vaxxers?
I'm pretty sure they're anti-vaxxers, Sean.
Fair enough. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, not a problem at all. She's called on anti-vaxxers to get a jab, but she has said that once vaccination targets are hit, and this is the good news, restrictions will ease on the following Monday.
It is really good news, Michael. Once the 70% full vaccination rate is hit, and New South Wales expects that within a fortnight, it means pubs, retail stores, gyms, they should all reopen, probably on October 11, but only for fully vaccinated people. At 80%, which is expected to be hit about mid-October, there'll be 10 visitors allowed in a person's home. Community sports will play again, stand-up drinking at pubs, vertical consumption, they say, will be allowed. International travel caps will be reconsidered. Regional travel won't be allowed until that point. So if you're in one of the major cities and you want to go out to the regions, that won't happen till the second half of October. There'll also be stadiums reopened. The 4 square metre rule will be implemented, but there won't be caps on weddings or funerals. So that's very exciting. Then at 90%, and hopefully New South Wales will hit that by early December, the 2 square metre rule will apply. Masks won't be necessary in offices. Nightclubs will reopen. And only then will unvaccinated people start enjoying freedoms at this point. It's really good news for the people of New South Wales who have been in lockdown for coming up to 14 weeks. There was even good news in terms of the cases yesterday for that state, with 787 recorded yesterday, lower than in recent weeks. But the news point there, which I think is really important to point out, is if you're not vaccinated, you're not going to get many freedoms until the 90% level is hit.
And Sean, what about the other states? I'm thinking in particular of Victoria and of the ACT.
Well, Victoria is pushing very hard to get people vaccinated. Yesterday, the government offered grants of up to $10,000 to doctors and $4,000 to chemists to extend hours and increase vaccination volumes in certain regions. There were more than 700 cases yesterday, unfortunately, in Victoria, though Premier Daniel Andrews said the state was trending at a more positive level than previously forecast. So that's good news. He said he's hoping the state and international borders will reopen by Christmas. The state's single jab vaccination rate is now approaching 78%, and the full vaccination rate is at about 47%. In the ACT, restrictions will ease slightly from Friday, with 2 people able to visit other homes and outdoor recreation times extended. There were 19 new cases yesterday, and sadly, the territory's first death.
So how did markets perform over the past 24 hours?
The S&P ASX 200 finished up 0.5% yesterday to close at 7,384 points. The energy and financial stocks outperformed, while the healthcare and information technology stocks underperformed. Commonwealth Bank, it was a real standout, up almost 3%, while both Afterpay and CSL were down nearly 2%. Fortunately for the big miners, iron ore prices look to have stabilised around the $110 a tonne level. That's provided support. Fortescue Metals, which if you remember last week hit a 52-week low, ended yesterday up 2.7%, while Rio Tinto was more than 1% higher. Interesting side note on yesterday, US payments giant Square, it's bid $39 billion for Afterpay. As part of that process, it's emerged that there was another potential bidder for Afterpay, which pushed Square into making the offer.
Oh, wow. And what about Wall Street overnight?
Well, Wall Street was mixed overnight, with tech stocks lower. In early afternoon trading, the Nasdaq is trading lower, the S&P 500 is flat, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average is higher. That's what I'd call mixed. Bond yields rose sharply, though, with the benchmark 10-year note hitting its highest level since June. That suggests traders are expecting a stronger economy in the next few months. It was the same for European markets, with London's FTSE up slightly, while the Stoxx Europe 600 was lower. There's a few other bits and pieces around too, Michael. Oil prices are proving remarkably resilient at the moment. Brent crude is at its highest since October 2018. On the supply side, there's been disruptions, mostly around weather and mostly in the US. On the demand side, people are very confident that the global economic recovery is picking up and that will push up demand. Gold prices have also risen over the past 24 hours, not that that's helped any of the local gold stocks. The precious metal is trading at $760 an ounce. That's come after 3 successive weeks of falling prices for gold. And the Aussie dollar has appreciated a touch. It's trading around 73 US cents.
We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Now, Sean, I mentioned at the top of the show that Sigma Healthcare has lobbed a bid for Australian pharmaceutical industries, topping the Wesfarmers bid made last month.
Yes, Michael, it's drug wars, sort of. It's more like pharmacy wars. Sigma and API are the two big pharmacy wholesale pharmaceutical groups in the country. A few years back, API made a bid for Sigma, which was knocked back. And then last week, the API board agreed to an offer from Wesfarmers. But now Sigma has come in over the top. Clearly, there's more synergies in a bid by Sigma, but also more competition issues. It's a very tough sector, this one. The chemist wholesalers like Sigma and API sign up to something called the Universal Service Obligation. Now, under that, they agree to deliver drugs to chemists anywhere in the country within a defined time period. And that's really hard, particularly in a COVID world. Then you have the big drug manufacturers going direct to customers and pharmacies, undercutting the wholesalers, and they're not part of the whole universal service obligation. And obviously, it's critical that customers can actually access whatever drugs they're prescribed when they go to the chemist. So that whole sector really does need consolidation so that they've got the size to actually provide the service that they need to under this universal service obligation. Yesterday, both API and Sigma's share prices ended higher.
Sean, we've talked a lot about cryptocurrencies in the past.
Michael, you've spoken a lot about cryptocurrencies in the past, but go on.
I know, it's one of my favourite topics, partly because I don't really understand them. But we've really talked about how volatile they can be. And now is really a critical time for digital currencies because central banks aren't exactly supporting them.
That's right. There's a lot going on at the moment. Two of the world's largest Bitcoin exchanges, Bitcoin being the largest cryptocurrency. So two of the exchanges have stopped taking new registrations for Chinese users so as to comply with Beijing's latest cryptocurrency ban. Late last week, the People's Bank of China said all crypto-related transactions are considered illicit financial activity. Now, given about 40% of trading in cryptos comes out of China, that's bad news. Bitcoin itself is still trading around $44,000 US a unit, so it's not fatal. But there is this move among central banks, and particularly out of China, to crack down on those digital units. Outside China, central banks have been lukewarm at best about cryptocurrencies. That includes the Reserve Bank of Australia and the US Federal Reserve. There's a market for them. People want to buy and sell them. Therefore, there is a market. And some sellers of goods and services will take cryptocurrencies as payments. But it's hard to see them ever becoming mainstream unless the central banks of major economies recognise them. What China did late last week just sets them back that little bit further.
Sean, we mentioned earlier the really good news out of New South Wales yesterday in terms of the roadmap out of lockdown. It's helped the travel companies to finally get a wriggle on.
Sure did. No sector has been hit harder than the travel and tourism stocks. And yesterday, most of the big ones jumped after the New South Wales reopening plan was outlined. Flight Centre closed up more than 7%. In fact, this is a company that's done really well over the last 6 weeks. It's up 50% in that time. Yesterday, Webjet was up more than 5%. Corporate Travel Management and Qantas were both up more than 3%. Qantas is now up 37% in less than 6 weeks. It's great news, but of course the stocks are way down from their peaks in late 2019, early 2020. In fact, Qantas is still 20% below its peak.
And speaking of Qantas, Sean, yesterday CEO Alan Joyce announced the Flying Kangaroo will ground its non-stop Perth to London service until next April, but will operate Darwin to London non-stop when borders reopen, hopefully at the end of the year. Flights from Western Australia to New South Wales and Victoria will also be delayed for 2 months. It comes after Mr Joyce held talks with the WA government, who seem pretty determined to keep the borders closed. Alan Joyce is a force to be reckoned with, but has he met his match in WA Premier Mark McGowan?
I think we've all met our match in WA Premier Mark McGowan. Mr McGowan is an absolute recalcitrant when it comes to reopening borders and allowing travellers in and out of his state. If Mr Joyce can't convince him, I'm not sure that many can, but let's just hope that at some point Western Australia knocks down the borders.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's a really big week this week for initial public offerings. According to the Financial Review, it could in fact be the biggest ever. What's going on?
There are 7 companies, each with valuations of $1 billion or more, pitching to investors this week. That doesn't mean that they'll actually list this week, but they're trying to raise the money and get the support this week. And they come from all parts of the economy. There's a company called Venture, which is a maintenance service group. At the moment, it's owned by CIMIC, which is listed, the old Leightons, and PE group Apollo Global Management. It's trying to list worth about $2.5 billion. There's global equities manager GQG Partners. It wants to list and it's valued at more than $1 billion. SG Lottery is a big one. It's owned by American gaming group Scientific Games. It's trying to list on the ASX at about $5 billion. Remember, Australia is home to a lot of the gaming groups that operate into the US. And a couple of others worth mentioning. Judo Bank's meeting investors this week, so too Vulcan Steel and New Zealand telco Orcon. The positive news is that there's plenty of money around looking for a home, so that helps these guys who are trying to do IPOs. The less positive news is that the market has been a bit choppy over the past week or two, and uncertainty is not good for initial public offerings.
Sean, what's making headlines in today's news media?
The Financial Review is reporting this morning that Treasurer Josh Frydenberg has given the green light for regulators to crack down on high debt home loans so as to reduce risks from record low interest rates and rising property prices. I've spoken a fair bit about this one, Michael. The government and regulators want to guard against homeowners ending up with too much debt. There's also several stories about the Federal Nationals and their battle to find a common ground around climate change policy. It's a tough issue for the Nats, given many of their constituents are in high carbon emission industries. Leader Barnaby Joyce is open to a deal as long as there's no job losses, but some of his counterparts, particularly those from Queensland, are against any shift. And finally, The Australian is running a story saying that Woolworths is doubling down on the COVID-19 boom in online shopping, launching a nationwide online marketplace that will offer more than 2,000 products not available on supermarket shelves. And that ranges, Michael, from everything from vacuums to reusable nappies.
Okay, and what's the key overseas news this morning?
The centre-left Social Democrats Party has won the biggest share of the vote in the German national election, beating the outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel's centre-right party in a very tight race. Olaf Scholz, the head of the Social Democrats, now needs to reach out to smaller parties to form a coalition and become Chancellor of the country.
Now, Sean, how about this one? COVID-19 has triggered the biggest falls in life expectancy since the Second World War in most developed nations. According to a report in the Financial Times, men's life expectancy fell more than women, and particularly US males. American men have had 2.2 years wiped off average life expectancy.
Incredible. I do have to leave you with one story, though, and it's all about Norway, Michael. The country lifted all COVID restrictions over the weekend after 18 months. It triggered massive clashes and disturbances around the major centres. Basically, everyone went out to the pub or to a bar or a restaurant. It triggered overcrowding and massive brawls, particularly in Oslo. Well worth trying to get some vision of what happened in Oslo and what can happen when you let a bunch of people who have been locked down for so long out onto the streets.
Maybe now we know why Mark McGowan won't open the borders.
Ah, yes, maybe he's in front of us all.
That's right. Now, up next is the Daily Interview, and today you're talking to Peter Fitzsimons, author, journalist, and the chair of the Australian Republic Movement.
Yeah, it was a good time to talk to Peter because the Australian Republic movement is starting to gain some momentum again and has come to the fore a little bit in recent times with the Prime Minister Scott Morrison playing such a major role in global affairs over the past week or so.
Yeah, an interesting one. That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael. Enjoy your day.
It's Tuesday, the 28th of September, 2021. Make sure you followed Fear and Greed on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please tell a friend or a colleague, leave us a review online, and give us 5 stars. Thanks for your company. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Enjoy your day.